Hey everybody, thanks for checking out Torque Twist Part 2. My first video on torque twist and portal axles didn't convince everybody, which is okay. Torque twist and portal axles are commonly misunderstood, which is why I make these videos. I'm going to explain it again in slightly different terms, and hopefully it will make more sense. On this channel, I'll explain the science behind our grown-up toys. Portal axles on their own don't automatically reduce torque twists. It's the gear reduction inside that often comes along with portals that reduces the twist, not the axle itself. Let's do a quick review and then I'll follow up with a demonstration. Let's start as simply as possible and build from there. Picture your motor directly attached to the tire. Remember Newton's third law. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. When the wheels meet resistance to rotation, the motor wants to rotate in the opposite direction. Since your motor is attached to the skid and chassis, the chassis twists the motor housing, which is called torque twist. Let's keep it simple and switch to a top view. Imagine adding a floating box or housing around this drive shaft. Nothing is attached to the box, it's just floating in space. The axle is spinning through the box on bearings. In one side, out the other. There's still a rigid shaft connection between the motor and the tire, and this box is simply floating on bearings. Is there any force or twist acting on the gray box? No, just a very small amount of bearing friction. The plate the motor is attached to wants to resist the force of the wheel, but not the gray box. It's just along for the ride. Now let's add some gear reduction to this floating box. There is still no force trying to influence or rotate the box. The skid wants to react to the tire contact patch. That's it. Nothing has changed. Does this start to look familiar? It's basically a straight axle setup without the bevel gear. Now let's add some more gear reduction. There's still no force trying to influence the box. This is a portal axle without the bevel gears. Everybody good so far? Now let's replace the floating box with an axle housing and change two of the gears to bevel gears. You still have no reaction at the axle, it's just floating. The torque comes in one end and out the other. The input drive shaft is acting against the other bevel gear, not the housing. Here is what a more complete straight axle vehicle would look like, with a transmission added by the motor. Remember this box from before? Your chassis and skid is the dark gray box. Nothing has changed from the prior examples. The motor force is reacted at the tire. There's no force or twist acting on the axle housing. Now let's add some portal gears. Here it is again with the boxes. There's still no twist on the axle box. The drive torque just passes through. It doesn't matter where your gear reduction is, only the total gear reduction from motor to tire matters. Now let's address a common misunderstanding. Let's say you have a 10-to-1 output from your transmission. Your drive shaft is seeing a 10-to-1 torque between the transmission output and the axle. Now let's move some of the gearing from the transmission to the axle. This is what happens when you add a portal axle. The total gear reduction is still 10-to-1 because you multiply the two ratios. The misunderstanding is that since you've moved some of the gear reduction from the transmission to the axle, there is less torque on the drive shaft, which reduces twist. The drive shaft is now seeing 5-to-1, which is good. It reduces strain on your drive shafts and transmission, but it doesn't change twist. It doesn't matter if the drive shaft torque is 5-to-1 or 10-to-1. The twist reaction doesn't happen until you get to the tire. You can't just pick one small portion of the drivetrain and isolate it. You have to look at the complete system. The action is the motor, the reaction is the tire. It doesn't matter where the gear reduction occurs in between those 2 points. Of course, there is torque in this drive shaft, and there is visible twist between the skid and the axle, but that twisting reaction is not coming from forces between the axle and the skid. The drive shaft simply cannot impart any forces on the axle. All you can do is spin the bearings inside the axle. One of the misconceptions people have is that moving some of the gear reduction away from the transmission and putting it on the axle reduces twist. This is not correct logic, and the math does not support this. Let's see a demonstration. I've got the rear axle completely detached. There's no shocks or links or anything holding it. It's just floating in space. I'm going to hold it with my hand. And then what I'm going to demonstrate is whether or not this drive shaft puts any twist onto the axle. A lot of people believe that's the case, and I said that because your differential runs on bearings, the force coming from the drive shaft simply passes right through without any effect on the axle. And we're going to see if that's accurate or not right now. So let me test the throttle. Okay. So, yeah, there's no twist whatsoever being transmitted to my axle. It's passing right through. Yeah, I don't even feel bearing friction. It's completely free. Watching this back, I can see how it looks like there might be some twist happening, but that's just me moving it with my hand. I'm trying to exaggerate or emphasize any forces, and I just don't feel anything. There are no twisting forces between the axle and the chassis. This clearly shows that the chassis and skid want to rotate around the wheel, not the front axle or differential. All right, now we're going to test it where I can put a little bit of resistance on the tire. So let's get it going. Run it at medium speed. All right, as I add resistance to the tire, it wants to twist the skid, and it also wants to lift up the front of the rear axle. So the rear axle is rotating this way, counter to the braking force on the wheel, but I'm not feeling any rotation in the axle at all. Got it. Did you see that skid lift? That's from the drive shaft being resisted at the wheel. Go ahead and try it one more time, real slow. Stop. All right, one more time. Now, I'm not feeling any twist at the axle. I'm only feeling the rotational resistance of the axle, which makes sense. The rotation in blue is the counter rotation coming from the upper portal gear wanting to walk around the lower portal gear, which is directly attached to the wheel. This is what causes wheelies and the front end to lift or unweight, when of course it's attached to the chassis. The orange twist is the skid rotating around the resistance of the tire, and it's at 90 degrees from the tire because of the bevel gears. Again, there's no twist at the axle because the drive shaft, the diff gears, bevel pinion, and spur gears all turn on bearings. They cannot and do not impart any force onto the axle. I hope that's clear now. Let me emphasize one more time. If you simply added a portal axle to your rig with a 2-to-1 reduction, yes, you will reduce your torque twist. But you can achieve the same thing with a smaller pinion or any 2-to-1 gear reduction anywhere along your drivetrain. It's not the axle, it's the total gearing. But you don't have to take my word for it. Research any companies that make portal axles and you will never see a mention of reduction of torque twist in any of their literature. For example, Werewolf or 74 Weld are great places to start. Even Vanquish and Axial never mention that. My primary rig has portals and a 95-to-1 rear gear reduction. And as you can see, I still have twist. On a shaft-driven vehicle, it's always going to be there. Gear reduction, shock tuning, and sway bars are the only way to address it. And just so you know, you cannot fix it with linkage geometry, but that's a topic for another day. So what did we learn? Portal axles on their own do not reduce torque twist. It's the gear reduction that actually reduces the twist. And most common 10th scale portal crawler axles have about a 2-to-1 reduction built in. A portal axle with no gear reduction would not change your torque twist at all. Similarly, you can add reduction anywhere else within your drivetrain and get the same result as a portal axle. For example, a motor pinion with half the teeth. I hope that helps. Remember, it's just a toy.